us. And I'll just let him continue. These are really good stories. Aaron, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I actually don't speak very often anymore in public. I spent 10 years on the road with a band called Streetniks. We came to every place, including Estevan. Played at the high school. I think the Art Society had us at a community center. And so we used to do 350 shows a year, and I used to be up on stage in front of people all the time. And you kind of do that for a while, and you go, oh, all right, it'd be nice to kind of sit in the background. So this is a rarity and a real pleasure to be back in Estevan. It's now been 20 years. So I'm sorry that it's been so long. I hope it's not as long again. I'm going to talk a bit about how we survive innovation. For communities like Saskatchewan, communities like Estevan, innovation tends to cause more problems than it solves initially. And we have a way that we do things. We've built lives here, and they're going pretty good most of the time. And when they go badly, it's because international markets got messed up, or it's because somebody figured out how to do something in a way that doesn't involve us anymore, and now we have to figure out a new way to be applicable. And that's kind of the story of the prairies. Like, it's happened again and again, and you can just look at the number of people employed in farming now compared to when we started off in the 1900s. And every time that number got smaller, it was because somebody invented something, and that innovation came and disrupted whatever we were doing. So surviving innovation is, it sounds like it's a really pessimistic thing, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what that's about. But also then, the positive aspect is we can take innovation that happens here and position our communities for the future. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Because, the story of the prairies is also innovations from here that went around the world and changed. And, we're considered leaders in agricultural technology. And so as much as that's disrupted our own communities, it's also, changed communities around the world, and fundamentally for the better, right? Things are safer now. We can grow enough food for everybody. We didn't used to be able to. And that story isn't just on the farm, it's in mines, right? They're safer now than they used to be. And it's, it's in every aspect of energy production and distribution as well, from exploration all the way to our power plants and the way we use energy. So, how do we take the things that we could potentially build and turn them into something that does spread? And then, what does that mean here in Estevan? And it's been 20 years since I've been here, but it hasn't been 20 years since I paid attention to Estevan. And we talk about, how to make the small communities in Saskatchewan and, thrive, not just survive. And so what does that look like in terms of innovation? I have a belief that smaller cities and communities are actually better suited to initiating and using innovation than are large cities and existing technology hubs. So I'll talk a bit about that. I'm going to talk about how we can find places where labor is cheaper than technology and ensure that we're training for those jobs, because those are the ones that are going to survive. I'm going to talk about how we can take knowledge and become, that we have and use that particular knowledge base as the foundation for innovation that will allow us to continue with jobs in the next generation of innovations. And yeah, I'm pretty bullish on Estevan, actually. I happen to think, and maybe you'll agree with me by the end, but I think all the ingredients are here more than in any other community in the prairies. And I think it's because of the confluence of mining, agriculture, and oil and gas and energy here. But I also think it's because of the intersection of municipal will, of a college that is willing to innovate and change, and a K-12 education system that is nimble. And so those are ingredients that do not exist most other places. So Anyway, I've said everything what I'm going to say. Thank you very much. So I'll just introduce myself, I guess. So I mentioned I sang with Streetniks. So it's 10 years of a cappella band across North America, 350 shows a year, living in hotels. And then I met the woman I wanted to be my wife, and I knew that was not going to marriage make, so I quit. And I had previously failed at a university, and I didn't have the marks to get in commerce. I'd been running a small company really for a decade, and thought maybe I'd go into business school, but they wouldn't let me back in because I'd failed out. So arts and science it was at the University of Saskatchewan, and they'll give anybody a degree in the humanities. Fortunately, computer science was a department there, so I went off and I ended up with a PhD in computer science, kind of by accident, a repeated series of accidents. And out of that, I joined a company that I knew a couple of people at that turned out to be a small startup called Solido Design. And I worked for that company for 5 years, building software that supports the semiconductor industry. So we build every computer chip in the world now. If you've got a phone in your pocket, that phone was built using software that was written in Saskatoon, 100%. Every piece, every semiconductor that's built is using our software. So when you get successful, you get bought out. So a big, huge German multinational called Siemens came along, and they bought us. And I've been working for them since. And now I do a couple of different things. One is that I run a team of applications engineers who are technical sales support people across Europe and North America for one of our flagship products. But the other part of my job is I work as a government affairs for Siemens Canada. I guess the other part about talking publicly is that I did enough of it kind of thinking maybe I could make a difference in some places, and then I realized actually that's what politicians do, and I didn't want to be a politician. And so now I'm in government affairs, just trying to avoid politicians. It's not going very well. So as part of that, I was a founding member of an organization called Sasktech. Now, about 8 years ago, the government of Saskatchewan came to some companies in Saskatoon, and they said, there's a tech industry. We didn't know there was a tech industry. This is awesome. What can we do? How can we make you bigger? And we all looked at each other and said, government can just stay away, thank you. And they said, no, but really, what can we do? If you guys could just organize and tell us what you want, that would be fine. And so we did, we sat down and we thought a little bit about what government can do, and realized really, and asked where our problems were. And our problem was around labor. Right? People didn't think of tech companies in Saskatchewan, and increasingly all of the Saskatchewan companies are tech companies. Nutrien was at that table. Federated Co-op was at that table. Connexus was at that table. SGI was at that table. So we're a whole bunch of little tiny startups. And collectively, the issue was, well, there aren't enough people with the right skills to be able to fill all of the gaps that we're starting to have. So how could we possibly help make a difference? And, we then spent about 2 or 3 days talking about what actually is a tech company, and decided that was undefinable. So instead, we would just let anybody who wanted to say they were a tech company be a tech company, and that was enough for us. So as long as they shared the problem. So we got about 150 companies and organizations, maybe up to 200. And the shortest AGMs in the world, which basically means, yep, everything's going fine, keep going. And then everyone hangs up the phone. But what we worry about are 3 things. We worry about tomorrow. We have hundreds of open jobs in the province around technology in some way or form. And so, trying to get people into those jobs is immediate training, right? How can we just, give that person the next course, or get them the licensing that's going to get them into that position? Or, maybe actually get the people, bring them in through immigration pathways. We worry about the medium term, which is, what are our post-secondary institutions doing that are going to allow, how can we enable our post-secondary institutions to be able to have more graduates from the programs that matter, but also help get rid of the really narrow view of what a technologist is. We don't actually just need people who can program computers. We need people who can program computers, but actually, write a document that says this is what they did in language that's understandable by somebody who doesn't program a computer. And that means that they have to do more than just a computer science degree. They have to do a bunch of stuff. And then the long-term problem. And the long-term problem is, what are we doing in our K-12 system or pre-K-12 system that's going to make sure that when my kids, who are 7, 15, and 17, are entering the job market, they have been prepared all their lives for the kinds of things that are going to exist. Sorry, am I out of time? No? Okay. I'm just, keeping track. And that's a pretty hard problem, right? There are really big systems at play there. But it matters to us. So we're not really good at long-term planning. Nobody's getting paid for this job. So we try to take these little bite-sized pieces and fix them. When we started, for instance, our immigration, the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program was bringing in people who were network operations folks. And that was really important for SaskTel and Sask Power in the 1990s and early 2000s. And it had nothing to do with what jobs were needed in the 2010s. And so the first thing we did was say, stop doing that, for God's sakes, because now they're just driving taxis in Saskatoon or Regina, or they're coming in at great expense to Saskatchewan and realizing there are no jobs for them, and they're moving to Toronto and Vancouver. And we're losing all of that investment that we've made to get them across the border. And support as they try to find the jobs. So 3 or 4 years later now, we have a constant flow of software engineers and software developers. We have people who are able to do technical sales, quality assurance, all of the things that were really big gaps then and persist. And now we have a process in place to review that so that we don't kind of get disjointed again. And we're even doing predictive analytics through the government is, on what's going to be needed, and then making sure that they're tweaking those programs as much as possible. So now there's a tech talent pathway that's specific to Saskatchewan, designed to get people in faster and into the jobs that are needed. We recognized that we had this massive gap in computer science and robotics training, and that we were starting to do some stuff about, introducing coding in elementary school. And then you got to high school, you couldn't take any coding until grade 10. And so we established the practical and applied arts robotics and coding program. That was us. That was like pitching that to the Minister of Education at the time, and using the curriculum that had been developed by teachers on the ground already across the province on their own. There were about 24 teachers doing various kinds of things around here. And it was like, well, we don't want to do this from scratch. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff working in it. 12 months from proposal to rollout, which, if any of you have tried to work through an education bureaucracy, is like lightning struck the same place 3 times to make that happen. I'm sure that somewhere there's a bureaucrat rolling over about how we didn't fill out Form 72/A2, but that's their problem. For the K-12 or K-7 space, we supported Saskatoon Industry Education Council's CAN code application 3 times. And they rolled out first to 1 division, then across Saskatchewan twice. Robotics kits. And they trained the teachers on that. So somewhere around 1,500 teachers got training in how to incorporate technology instruction on robotics into kids starting in kindergarten. And then they could apply, and a kit would be shipped to them. They'd unpack it, teach the course that they learned how to do, pack it back up, and send it off. And so those are still circulating. It's in perpetuity. But there were millions of dollars of funding, federal funding, that came in to be able to do that. That was the only non-national organization in Canada that received that funding 3 times. Every other organization was like some national organization trying to do a little bit everywhere across the country. In Saskatchewan, it was just the Saskatoon Industry Education Council, and all that money got spent here. Few other things, a bunch, and we do labor market economic impact studies. We're in the process of doing one of those right now. And that's like, how much money do people actually make in technology? And are they here? And who are they? And what's the demand? And what do companies need? And what are the skills for it? And so we need to know those data to be able to make any of the decisions that I've been talking about. So that's what our organization does. It's going pretty well. So I'm not here to talk about any of that, so I'm sorry for wasting your time. But what I do want to talk about is in 1968, the very first robotic arm was put into an auto manufacturing firm, probably in Detroit. I don't actually know the first place it was deployed, either Detroit or somewhere in Japan. And the whole world changed. And in my head, I have two guys, they would have been guys in those days, two guys sitting in a pub in Windsor, Ontario, who were working in one of the many automotive factories there, building whole cars, whole supply chains were there. And they're looking at each other over their third or fourth beer as the news of this has percolated down, or maybe there's 50 of them, or maybe some factory in Detroit just closed. Well, they install them all and all the workers are laid off. And they're sitting there looking at each other, thinking about how they're going to handle this. Both union members. And one of them is thinking, okay, we're going to fight this. We're going to sit as long as we can on these jobs. We're going to push through the regulations that are going to make sure that there's got to be somebody watching each one of these machines when they do their job, because we know how this goes. They're going to make mistakes. Only we really know how to make sure this floor is going to operate properly. And the other guy's saying, that might work for a couple of years, and my mic died. That might work for a couple of years. I'm told there are no more 9-volt batteries in the entire building, so I'm just going to talk loudly. Let me know if you can't hear me. That might work for a couple of years, but then we're out of a job. And if we want to get ahead of it, we have to figure out what the next job is going to be. And the first guy won in Windsor. The unions doubled down, tried to preserve every job that they could, tried to get as much money for the members as they could in the short term. That's what happened. The real productivity in vehicle parts plants and vehicles in Windsor went up year over year from 1970 to 2023. And every year the workforce decreased after that. So they built more, faster, better, maybe, with fewer people. In 2001, for instance, there were 176,000 people in Canada employed in the production of automotive vehicles and parts. 15 years later, there were 120,000. That's 56,000 people lost their jobs. And that was after a rebound, by the way. At its lowest point, it was 100,000, and there was a bit of a rebound up to 120,000. In the coming 2 years, there are 2 electric vehicle factories, the battery plants, being built in Windsor. Each one of those are going to employ, or Windsor area, they're each going to employ 3,000 people. So there are going to be 6,000 jobs in that new paradigm, like it or not. And that's going to account for more than 150% of the workforce currently employed in Windsor, Ontario. And so the question is twofold. One is, where the hell are they going to find all those people? And what are the skills that they're going to need? And are they going to be the same as the people that they've just laid off over the last 25 years? And the second question is, what could they have done to not skip a whole generation of workers? because it's rebounding. I mean, it will, right? Population pressure happens. There's then opportunity to be able to put these things in. Governments invest, they incent companies, innovations happen. People decide to do them in Estevan instead of in Toronto, or in Windsor instead of Detroit. And so it's kind of inevitable, but holy heck, that's been a really tough 30 years, 40 years for that region. They don't call it the Rust Belt for nothing. So we missed it, right? That guy thinking about the next jobs didn't talk to the right people, or he didn't get heard properly, and the jobs became smaller and they became more disposable. They turned to delivery and service jobs, not high-paying, stable manufacturing jobs. People moved away. They weren't making the robotic arms. They were not writing the software that was running on them. They weren't doing the process automation or the quality management. They didn't have the design jobs to figure out how new vehicles could be made in old plants. They didn't even have very many of the jobs for repurposing the plants. That was done with low-cost, non-unionized labor. Same thing in the oil patch. Canadian contribution to crude extraction has increased by 50% in the last decade, for the last data. So that's like from 2012 to 2022. At the same time, the workforce has decreased by 20%. This isn't being driven by world markets or policy. This is companies trying to get more profits. And that equation is if they can reduce the number of people employed while increasing their revenue, it's a no-brainer, right? Every time a new technology comes along, that's what happens. Agriculture, again and again. Mining, again and again. Even commerce. And when the advent of Amazon and eBay destroyed the businesses in Ontario and Quebec, it created a tidal wave of business failures and unemployment. At the same time as tens of thousands of people began to be employed to support these companies because they all take warehouses and transshipment locations. They all take computer programmers and a ton of other kinds of behind-the-scenes things. Those were mostly in the US, where those companies started, and then in India, and then in China, and Bangladesh, and Egypt, and other places where labor is cheaper than technology for at least a little while. And so let's just hold on to that idea of labor being cheaper than technology, because that's actually the fundamental equation. So I'm here now because those disruptive technologies, like that robotic arm in the automotive manufacturing, like Amazon for selling things to people where they are, those are happening here in Saskatchewan now, right? In the 1970s and 80s, it was automotive disruption. In the 90s, it was finance and commerce. We didn't notice that much here. In the 2000s and 2010s, it was factory automation and transportation. And in the 2020s, it's agriculture, mining, and energy. So agriculture is now our ag tech. And if you have any doubts about that, all you have to do is go and look at the GDP numbers in Saskatchewan for agriculture. Farm receipts, basically the amount farmers are making, been flat for almost a decade and a half. We don't make any more money than we used to if you're a farmer. Not really, not in real terms. Our ag numbers are going up. They go up. They're like, I think it's 36% CAGR, the compound growth, right? So year over year, over 5 years. That's all value added. So that's all, canola crushing. That's all, pea processing. That's all, whatever we can try to figure out. But those are all automation, right? Those are factories. Those aren't farmers. And some farmers figured it out, and they have some of that on their land. But the scale of these is such that it really isn't an individual kind of company or individual farm that does this. It's a collective one. But that's, when we talk about agriculture growth in this province, that's what we're talking about. And so there's a potential for that equation to shift, Because like the green revolution in the 60s and 70s, when yields exploded, I mean, that was the first time that we really got genetic selection going at a fast rate. We got, with drought tolerance being a really top one here, fertilizers for the first time, pesticides deployed at large scales. All this happened in the 70s and 80s, and yields went way up. We made a whole bunch of money. I moved here in 1980 from Ontario, and it was good. Like, even with the drought years, it was still pretty good. And what's going to change here is that autonomous farming, which is actually more precision farming, and precision irrigation is going to start to become a thing that has the potential to change the game for farmers. But once again, it's going to be who owns the technology stream, who owns the data that comes out of it, who owns the way in which it's being applied, and it's going to be who is in charge of those innovations that's going to have the biggest factor for whether or not the province continues to be profitable for farmers on the ground. So all of those are potentially innovations here. You can see behind us a drone. They're very interested. Brandy was telling me right before that she's super interested in ag. They're doing some methane monitoring right now because that's the low-hanging fruit and really easy, right? But they're very interested in ag, and they're not the only ones. And so having those kinds of innovations come out of our communities that already have the knowledge about farming is what might make that difference. Mining is now mining tech. By 2030, Nutrien claims that only 1% of the mining workforce currently underground will expect it to be there. So out of 100 people, only one person will be left underground. And already we're boring from the head. I got a story about this in a bit. But not from actually the face. Energy is the same thing, right? Nuclear, hydrogen, vehicle electrification, geothermal, batteries, even solar and wind. We see it all around us. We have baseload conversations till our eyes go blue, and we talk about what's actually going to be able to keep powering us, and we're still going to need oil and gas. We're still going to be using coal for another 50 years, but inevitably, there are shifts coming in this, and these new technologies are coming forward. We're sitting very close to one of the proposed sites for the first small modular reactor in Saskatchewan. Understanding what that jobs are going to be like, but also understanding how quickly, when those things come online, is Saskatchewan Light and Power going to be able to decide that it's going to be able to bow to the community pressure from the city and shut down its coal mine? And what's that going to mean for all of the infrastructure that supports, or not coal mine, sorry, coal plant, the QE2. And what's that going to mean for the whole communities that are supported by that flow? So we don't have a roadmap for any of those things, but we do have a history. And I've gone over some of the history, and like anything else, it's kind of messy, right? Like, the winners and losers are a bit hard to pick until after the fact, and it's really hard to know how to get there. But I'm going to give you an example of where we can find the safety, because that's the first thing I was going to talk about, which is innovation, surviving innovation. Larry Long, the former chief operating officer of Nutrien, a friend of mine. And you might have caught, I just saw that they publicly released it, but last month they announced that the Lanigan mine now does all the boring operations from the surface, which means that they're running the borers, the machines that grind away at the face of the mine. They're running those entirely remotely. And Larry's been pretty excited about this for a while. It's a really big safety concern, right? The most likely, your danger of getting hurt increases exponentially as you approach the active face of a mine. So you go down in that elevator, it's actually more dangerous than being at the top. Get right to that face, it's like 1,000 times more dangerous. That's where most of the injuries come from. So if they can get people away from there, it's good for the people, it's good for the business, it's good for their insurance, but it's also potentially good in other ways. And Larry was leading a bunch of investors and other high-flying folks through Lanigan Mine, and they get to the boring operations, and they've got two stations side by side. Guys can see each other, and one is this fresh-faced engineer, just out of school, and he's operating this machine, and it's like the best ride of his life. He's like so super excited, stoked. The guy on the other side of him is 63. He's been underground his entire life. This was the culmination of his career, and he was going to be retiring very soon. And Larry's like, all he can think is, uh-oh. How's this going to go over, this story of automation I'm about to sell? And so first he takes him to the fresh-faced engineer, and the fresh-faced guy's like, look at all of these dials and buttons and switches, and I can do this and that and the other thing, and I can see what's happening, and I'm, know where I've gone and whatever else, and it's the most awesome thing, and everyone's like, yeah, this is great, whatever. And he goes over to the other guy, and Larry's like, and yeah, here's this other guy. And the guy says, it's great. I can see the left side of the machine. It's like all his life he's been drilling, and he's only been able to see one side of the machine because he's kind of buried inside it. And so now he can see what the hell's happening on the other side. He said, and I go home and I don't hurt and I don't cough because vibrations aren't driving me nuts. And, there's no dust. And I don't need a shower right away before I can do anything else because I'm not hot. It's great. I think I can do this for another, 5 or 6 years longer than I thought. And Larry's like, that's great, because the guy next to him doesn't know anything yet. And this guy has, a whole generation, 2 generations worth of knowledge that he's going to pass on through here. And the first piece that he passed on was, but you know what, Larry? Because, guys who've been down there that long can call the COOs by their first name. You know what, Larry? I can't feel it anymore. And that's a problem. And so they changed it. So now there's some haptic feedback on some of those chairs. So you can actually feel there's some feedback from when the bit actually hits the face, and so that he knows what's happening from the way that the chair moves a little bit. Not as much as if he were underground, but he improved the interface through that knowledge that would have been lost otherwise. And who knows what that changes in terms of productivity. Now, this is an example of where labor is cheaper than technology, though, because those aren't fully autonomous. They're still being driven. And so every time we find one of those moments where, we've injected a bunch of technology, but we still didn't remove the person, we should be saying, why? So the borer is better at seeing underground than a person is, can have 1 million more sensors, but it's not better at understanding. And to build a borer that understands what it sees is much harder than simply hiring somebody who already knows what they see. It's cheaper. There are only 5 or 10 borer operators per mine, maybe, at most. So spending millions and millions to have a machine that understands what it sees is too costly compared to hiring a few good people. Now, that's not to say that the operator's job is safe forever, right? Machine models of the space around us are improving really, really rapidly. An improvement in Tesla automation or in satellite weather interpretation can change the machine learning packages that are deployed, and they can be deployed to sensors on mining machines and infrastructure, and suddenly the borers could be out of work. It could happen. It's nothing safe, right? But right now, the technology is way more expensive than the people, and so they have jobs. And that's the equation. Anytime that it's harder and more expensive to build something than it is to just hire somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, then you're going to hire somebody who knows what the hell they're doing. Fun fact, a lot of that AI visual recognition stuff that's out there on the web is actually just people. Right? A lot of the images that you see, and it's like coming back, whenever you fill in one of those CAPTCHAs, by the way, is this a light standard, or is that a bus, or is that whatever? And you kind of have to say, oh yeah, good, you're not a robot. Yeah, bullshit. You're doing the work for them, And somewhere else in the world, there are images that are being classified thanks to your work, because that's been doing it. That kind of labor, I mean, that's the easy one. There's actually whole, like reams, thousands and thousands and thousands of people who do things like even listen to a Google Home message when somebody says, hey, Google, and gives it a message, and it can't figure it out. Somebody's listening to it to try to fix that, right? That's the backbone of a lot of the AI stuff, because people are cheaper than actually building machines that can do it right. We're still too far away from that kind of stuff. And so figuring out, now you don't want that job. I don't want that job. Nobody wants that job. But if it's a job that's available, you'll end up doing it. And I think that that's kind of the lesson, right? Is we want to make sure that the jobs that we are doing are the ones that we want to do in the fields that we've been kind of trained for. So in that example, the operator for the borer, they did have to learn, right? They learned a new machine, new sensor packages, a bunch of stuff. And there's a change between boring at the face and remotely. Obviously, they were taking in other cues that weren't there normally. They're going to constantly need to figure out what can they do better than machines. Are they better at interpreting seismic data? Are they better at tying together the multiple systems involved in moving product from the face to the head? Is there something else they can do that I don't know because I'm not in mining and I don't know anything about mining except having been very impressed from being down in them? So the key there is, what are the transferable skills or knowledge that can fuel innovation that allows them to pivot? So a pillar of an innovation economy is understanding at a very high level what those skills are. And that's a job for this college, amongst other places. Right, is to be able to say, hey, we know how to do this really, really well. If we taught this adjacent skill, now this other set of jobs would be available. Or we could innovate about the ways in which that we could use drones, right? Use them for new things that we haven't thought of yet. Because we live here and we understand the kinds of problems that we encounter. And now when we're given the tools to be able to do the next thing, we can apply those tools innovatively to solve the problems that we've been having all along. So here's another example. North Bay, Ontario. Was there last June, and one of the places I visited was I sound like I just do junkets for a living, don't I? Yeah? I'm sorry. I don't, really. I got the opportunity last summer to spend 10 days touring around Northern Ontario. Went into a Glencore mine, went up to Moose Factory on the Hudson's Bay, and saw a bunch of stuff from Sudbury to Thunder Bay, and North Bay and Timmins. It was really interesting because Northern Ontario is another forgotten area of the country. It's another resource extraction based space. Got a large Indigenous population that, and the two cultures are constantly struggling, same way we are here. They having a massive increase in immigration from places where they didn't used to get immigration, constant struggle. They're subject to international markets without much control over them. And nobody in Toronto gives a shit about them. So it feels kind of similar. Anyway, there's a couple of guys up there who were longtime exploratory drilling consultants. And they were really frustrated with the increasing amount of infrastructure required to get where they need to be. Now, if you haven't been to Northern Ontario, it looks like Northern Saskatchewan. It's Canadian Shield, rocks and trees and water. And it's really hard to get around in that territory to do exploratory mining, or exploratory drilling, rather. And one of the things you tend to have to do is actually just knock down all the trees on a road till you can get in, right? And so you use whatever logging road infrastructure you can. Maybe you pre-position some stuff with some winter roads. And then in the summer, you go and you uproot a whole bunch of trees, maybe for kilometers, till you get where you need to be. Potentially, if you're really lucky, you can bring it on a float plane, but they tend to be really big rigs. They're really hard to move around. And the ore bodies are pretty well known where they're accessible. And so, exploratory drilling is happening more and more remotely all the time. And so it's getting more and more costly. Plus you got to fly in your fuel, got to, all your food, everything else. So what if they could make it better? What if they could do it more easily? And so they knew the field. They knew all the pieces necessary. They knew what it had to look like for a solution. And so they sat down, they iterated, and they ended up building these drilling rigs that are actually transportable by helicopter and can operate for a couple of days on like one tank of diesel. And it's totally enclosed systems. They find any clearing they can, they just drop right down, and they do their work, and then they go back up. They're selling like hotcakes all around the world, because there are lots of remote areas where we don't have any idea about what the ore bodies look like. And so, here's this idea where they took the transferable skills that they had, looked at what the problems were in the spaces where they already had the expertise, and then they went and figured out an innovative solution that is now growing in North Bay to the tune where they don't actually have enough room to expand, which didn't understand very well because it's a small town and I'm like from the prairies, and you just you buy the next quarter section and you expand. But they're like, no, you don't understand. We have to knock down a whole bunch of trees and blast out a bunch of rock. I'm like, oh. Anyway, so so this is a great example of transferring those skills for innovation. And it was driven by a changing industry, right? The industry is changing out of their control. The investors are more sensitive to sustainability issues. And so now they can say, hey, look, we got a sustainable solution. It also happens, and most importantly happens, it's economically more viable to do it this way. And so that's actually where the intersection makes sense. But it sells really well also because it helps meet the sustainability goals. So it's kind of a byproduct. So it does take fewer people to set up those field sites now. So there are jobs lost. But they're expanding this facility. They're better paying, more stable jobs in the manufacturing facility that they're establishing in North Bay. Energy. So Larry's story kind of highlights another aspect, right? There's a young guy and an old guy. New people in the workforce need to be at the top of the new skills needed. The value to that, having that new worker in there, is presumably that they come out with the knowledge that is updated to current technologies. And the skills needed are the same, but different, right? And so in energy, we have this interesting thing happening with microgrids. Electrification is coming. The number of electric cars in the world keeps going up by an order of magnitude every year. It's happening everywhere. Thing is, our grids can't hold it. When John Tory, was the mayor of Toronto, told the Toronto utility in charge of power that he wanted to have electric vehicles only in Toronto by 2050, they said, great, thank you very much, give us $10 billion. And he said, what? And they said, it's the distribution, stupid. Said, we don't have the distribution lines that would allow everybody to park their electric car in the garage and plug it in at the same time at the end of the day. Even if we did staggered and off-peak hours and everything else, it just won't work. We cannot distribute that energy, no matter what we do. So, a different model's needed. And so, one of these models is something that my company, not uniquely, but my company is piloting in the Maritimes. And you take a community the size of Estevan, quite seriously, 11, 12,000 people, and you say, all right, every third or fourth house, here's a $10,000 grant, you put a battery array in your garage. Every other third or fourth house, you guys put up some solar, whatever else. Maybe there's some wind, maybe you've got rural communities with more area, they're bringing that stuff in. And you say, okay, you're now a market. Not all of you need all of the energy at any given time. We're going to supply base load. We're Sask Power. We can do that. We're going to supply base load for you guys. But all of that peak stuff is going to be managed by you're collecting sun on a Sunday morning and you're filling up the batteries throughout the neighborhood. And, you know, on a Monday morning when everybody, you know, gets in the, turns on everything and runs the dishwasher and whatnot, we're going to deplete those batteries. But we're going to stagger it. And you guys are going to pay each other for that. So if you've generated, your neighbor's going to store that for you. You're going to pay them for that, right? But you've also got a piece of the energy that you just did. And when somebody needs to pull from it and they don't have enough in their battery and they want to pull from their neighbor down the way, or they need to charge a car, or maybe their car's plugged in and it could charge back to the grid, they're going to pay you for that. And lo and behold, if there's not very much power left to go around and Sask Power is going to have to kick it in, that's going to be the most expensive power around. And the market's going to be dynamic and you figure it out. And every time you guys exchange some power, Sask Power is going to take a little bit. That keeps the utility viable because they are taking like a, well, all right, let's call it a tax. It's a tax. They're taking a market fee. Right? The same way that if you're exchanging on a market, the arbiter just takes a fee. So that's what's paying for the base power and all of the infrastructure that's getting, you know, the distribution wires and whatnot. But you folks are able to regulate your own market in terms of that. You can do it automatically, you can do it manually, you can do it however you want. And what's happened is there are these basically autonomous markets where, you know, if I'm going to vacuum and it's, you know, it's Saturday morning when everyone else is vacuuming, it's going to cost me more. And so I can make a decision about whether or not I'm going to vacuum at that point. And everybody has the infrastructure to be able to support that. And then, yes, then you can actually electrify it. Everybody can plug in an electric car. But you're not all going to charge at the same time because you know that that would cost you a huge amount of money. And so the cars charge when you tell them to, or you say, charge when the price goes down this certain amount. Seems to be working. You can't do it at a larger scale. But if you do it at a small community scale like that, it actually seems to work. That's a whole bunch of microgrids, actually, is what that is. That's a technology that nobody knows anything about in this province, really. Even the people who work at Sask Power, it's like, you know, there's a room full of 5 or 6 people who really get it. But there's a bunch of knowledge that needs to happen. And so a couple of years ago, I helped put in an educational microgrid at Bishop James Mahoney High School in Saskatoon. And it's part of the curriculum. Part of all of the drawbacks, all of the positive things, what it means, and it's part of the curriculum not just in physics and math, but it's part of the curriculum in social studies, right? There's stuff about economics in here. It's part of the curriculum in the language arts class. I don't know how they did that, but they tell me they did that. And the important thing there is that we know microgrids are coming, and we need to be teaching about them and things like that are coming earlier in, we need to be teaching about those and preparing people for it in that K-12 system. Now, it took me 2 years to make that happen at one school in Saskatoon, and I don't know how many meetings. So the advantage in Estevan is I've heard that there's the potential for what amounts to a mechatronics program in the high school, and that kind of got thrown together in an afternoon. And I want to say that that's the way that you get shit done, and that's the kind of thing that actually really makes a difference. And so community like Estevan, with the fundamental knowledge about all of these spaces, understanding the problems that is connected to a campus like Southeast College, can use all of that and whatever innovation thing Gord's running, can use all of that stuff to be able to shift the delivery of curriculum. We all know we have to stay within the Saskatchewan established curriculum, but they don't tell us how we have to do that. And so we can change the delivery of that curriculum to be able to teach using modern tools. An example I have is that I have a kid in grade 11 this year. He still drew a paper map of Canada in one of his classes and labeled things on paper in somewhere in the world. And I'm like, in what universe does an adult do that in any freaking job? I'm like, it's not a big step to use a Google Maps API, right? I mean, they all have phones, can't get them off it. So, but I can't get that change to happen at the provincial level. I have been in meetings. I brought the SIMSA, the machinery organization. I brought the real estate organization. I brought the mining organizations. I brought the finance organizations all to the table one day at the Ministry of Education. And I said, look, we have to do this differently because our students don't know how to use the basic tools that are used out there in the real world when they graduate from grade 12. And some of them aren't going to go to college or university, and that's just fine. They need a job. And they said, we're not training people for jobs, we're training them to be citizens. And I'm thinking, a citizen without a job isn't very useful, is it? Sorry, my frustration with this experience bleeds out every now and then. But another example of why you can't get shit done in big cities. 2019, pardon my language, sorry. 2019, I sat down with the city of Saskatoon and their smart cities initiatives and said, look, we have a lot of small companies here, tech companies, we've got a university, we've got a polytech, they've got lots of innovative ideas. Instead of going out for tender to big companies around the world to do your next smart cities initiatives, why don't you just first come to the community in the province, say, hey, we'll do something below the threshold of procurement. $10,000, give it to you, show us your proof of concept. And then we can create a special program, an umbrella company that can bid on providing a whole series of these for you and grow it up so that we can grow up that innovation, give people a chance to have their first customer as the city of Saskatoon. You get first crack at the new technologies, everybody wins. That was in 2019. Everybody around the table said it was a great idea, got all the right people moving on it. Nothing has happened in 4 years. I haven't seen a single thing come out of it. It's always the next committee, the executive committee, whatever. You can get stuff done in small towns that way, or small cities, in communities. You can't get them done in big places. And so that's the third pillar here. The third pillar is getting stuff done, right? Getting stuff done on a scale that matters for you. So innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Innovation happens where we understand the problems. The reason we have Amazon and Uber is because the tech bros in California needed people to do things because they hadn't quite grown up yet. So they needed people to deliver food for them and drive them around because they couldn't be bothered to find parking or own a car. Or they didn't have friends, so they had Facebook. So they solved their problems with innovation. Those are businesses built on need. They're also choke points, if you want me to get started on choke point capitalism. But there's need here. Everybody here knows the next problem in whatever field there is. That's the space for innovation. There's knowledge. That's the other key. And then there's the ability to actually get stuff done by coordinating a community to be able to get the necessary skills deployed in the right way as possible. Estevan's also unique here because you have in a relatively small community the expertise from all of the areas that are currently being disruptive. I started by talking about the ways in which technology have disrupted other communities. And, you know, we think we've had it pretty hard here. But if you worked for Bombardier, or if you worked for an automotive manufacturing company, or if you worked even at a bank as a teller or clerk or something like that in Toronto, it's been a really rough 40 years. Because all of that technology and innovation really hit them where it hurt, and then there was no path out for them. Now it's hitting us. We kind of all have to say, well, what are we taking in our communities as a path forward to be able to try to innovate and change to meet those challenges? 'Cause 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 ' Estevan, it's all right here, right? You got mining, you've got agriculture, you've got energy. And so all of those places are places where there are opportunities for being able to change the landscape of the province. And frankly, I'd like to see that model exported because I've got communities that can't get their hands around it. Humboldt, PAMI's been there for 3 decades now. This is a prototyping organization for building advanced agriculture tools, amongst other things. It's done work for military. They've done work for testing vehicles for Ford. They can barely get their feet under them. They have never figured out how to connect that to what the community's doing, and they've never been able to, conversely, bring the community in to help them out with it. It's always been, 20 engineers they've hired from somewhere else in the country, largely, who've come to do that kind of thing in a skunk works. And I'd be surprised if the Tim Hortons across the way even knows they exist. I don't see that happening here. I think that it's a different kind of community. So I think there's a real possibility there. That probably means that I'm out of time, doesn't it? Anyway. So if you're on the inside of this and you're watching things change, you have the translatable skills and transferable skills, but you also have the domain knowledge that helps drive that innovation. I think Estevan is poised to demonstrate how this combination of knowledge, skills, and disruption and community effort can navigate rocky waters of innovation that's coming for us. I think there's a lot of room for growth, both in the community and the output of the community. And the last thing I want to say is that Saskatchewan needs a story like Estevan. We need to be able to tell the story of this community broadly to inspire other communities to step up and look for in themselves how to collaborate. My wife works at the University of Saskatchewan. Every year they get budgetary cuts. And every year I watch all of the communities within that university fight tooth and nail over a smaller and smaller pool. What they need to do is make the pool bigger. And being able to look outside and say, hey, it's only going to get smaller unless we make it bigger, rather than waiting for somebody else to make it bigger. Well, I think that's what we do. Thank you very much. Oh, no. Okay.
I love doing these as Q&A, but before you do,
sure.
I really want to echo, you guys know I'm new here, and I really want to echo what Aaron has said. I've been blown away. I come here and you guys want to do a tech hub, and then I go, hey guys, let's build a robot, and you're like, okay, what? It was pretty wild. And we're doing, and we got the guys in the back. How long have you guys been doing this now? Been working on it for a few months, and now you've got your advanced pilot's license. This is awesome. This is a really good community. But I'll save that for later. I'm sure everyone has a lot of thoughts. Anyone have questions that they would like to put to Aaron?
Sure.
One question. The innovation is great, and where do you see the funding sources of capital for some of these? Because I think there's some stuff gets solved. The ideas there, things like you mentioned, Tony, maybe there's on the funding or the risk ability of funders to look at those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I don't have the money. I'm sorry. So I was actually just talking about that. The funding landscape in Saskatchewan has changed enormously for early stage companies with innovative ideas. And the channels for that are through a couple of programs. The first is that there are pathfinding organizations that exist now. So Cultivator in Regina, Collabs in Saskatoon are incubators that are designed for tech and innovation companies. You have an idea for a company, you don't even need to have anything built, you go talk to them. They find the pathway for you. They point you to the resources necessary to found that company. And when it comes time for capital, they can start actually helping you pitch to people. The other thing is we have venture capital funding companies in the province now. There's 2 Connexus rounds, one for ag tech, the second one that they're just raising now for technology. There's also Broad Street Bulls, thank you, out of Regina. And they are all, they're angel investment funding, so they're based on basically that really early little bit. But I'll say the other thing is, those two incubators have been around for about 3 and 5 years respectively. They are the only incubators in North America where the members of the participating companies have earned more in revenue than they've raised in capital. And I think that says something really interesting about Saskatchewan. It means that people are building companies that are founded on, there's a way to make money right away here. We can do it, right? We can find somebody who's going to contract us to take this technology out and just try it out and get some answers and use that money back into the company really, really early on. And we can grow from a revenue basis instead of a speculative base. And that, I mean, that actually is, it's a massive cultural difference. I can't even, I sit in these meetings for companies across the country as an executive and a residence advisor for Foresight, which is a clean tech accelerator. And all of these people in Vancouver complaining, oh man, I just can't raise any money. I can't do anything because I don't have any money. And we're like, do you have any customers? Any? And they're like, no. Well, why? No wonder they're not giving you any money. You don't have a customer. Why would they give you money, right? We can get customers. There's also Made in Saskatchewan technology program where the government can be your first customer. If you have a solution that might be applicable to something that the government does, there's like a little sheltered thing up to 50 grand annually that you can kind of win as an award through that program. So there's a bunch of stuff that's kind of getting pieced together. The other thing is, if you're seriously, honestly frustrated about that, you reach out to people like me, reach out to people like Gord, and the job of someone in our positions is to make the necessary connections to be able to let people succeed in that way. The founders I talk to in Saskatchewan say there's never been a better time to start a company in Saskatchewan. It's incredibly supportive. There's a community of people, and it tends to have been concentrated in Saskatoon and Regina, but it's spreading and it's welcoming to founders from outside of those regions. And we need founders from outside of those regions because it's a big problem. Yeah.
So just in the spirit of what you were saying, just towards the end, I know you were talking about budget cuts, right?
Yeah.
Talking about how we need to be making the pie bigger or whatnot. Me and Gordon with small business, we always, we're going to have a lot of budding entrepreneurs from different areas coming in, looking for advice, looking for funding. So just piggybacking off of Jeff's question, would your advice to them be like line up, like to put it simply, just secure demand first, have customer, instead of worrying about how to get the money, make sure that you've got a buyer or somebody that actually wants your product or services before you worry about fitting in the box for funding, so to speak?
Well, everybody has to eat, right? So if you don't have enough money to eat,
Right.
You maybe need some funding. So there's such a thing as funding to be able to fund the exploration of your idea.
Right.
And that's what family and friends rounds are for. And the entrepreneurship prizes and things like that. You can enter into competitions and get better that way. Keep your old job for a little while if you still can. Things like that. But then, yes, I would say having a customer is the litmus test of whether or not you have a company. And there's two models. There's the Bay Area model, where it's basically keep losing money until you're so big that you own everything, and then you can start to jack up your prices. And it's actually a rug pull, right? Like everybody's invested in that company is going to lose their money. It's why I don't invest in Tesla. So I don't invest in Uber, right? And it's why you shouldn't invest in cryptocurrency. Sorry, I'm not up here for this, am I? But then there's the other kind of company that makes stuff that people need, right? And that's what I think, that's what we do better than anything else. It doesn't mean you can't be big, right? I mean, Nutrien makes stuff that people need. Siemens makes stuff that people need. It's just that, and to do that, it's just fine to grow organically. And you get to a certain size, you might want to seek extra capital to be able to build that next factory. But if that's the problem you're having, don't talk to me. I don't know how to do that.
What
Yeah.
sort of innovative growth are you expecting to see from Saskatchewan in the next 4 or 5 years?
That's a really good question. What sort of innovative growth am I expecting to see from Saskatchewan in the next 4 to 5 years? So we're on a pretty solid trajectory already. 10 years ago, there were almost no tech companies in the province, or companies that even would self-describe as innovation companies. Now there are hundreds. The amount of venture capital invested in companies in Saskatchewan 10 years ago was maybe 200,000. Last year was 120 million. Right, so there's an order of magnitude change in a decade. Do I think we'll get another order of magnitude change in the next decade? Probably not. There's kind of a certain kind of discovery limit there. But it really depends what happens, I think, in our communities outside of the two big cities. The two big cities we kind of got to that point now where the ecosystem is built in those communities. So if you're an entrepreneur in Saskatoon, there's a pathway. If there's technology that's coming out of the university, there's a pathway. It's not perfect, still working on it, but it's fundamentally there. It's not here yet. It's starting, but it's not here. And it's not in Weyburn, and it's not in Prince Albert and Battleford, and it's not in Kindersley and Lloyd. It's not in Swift Current. And it needs to be in all of those places. And and then I think actually what we would see is quite a big growth. I think it'd be very interesting. The other thing that would happen, if that happens, is that our next demographic shift in 10 years might actually be that the areas outside those big cities are growing, which would be the first time that's happened in, 3 decades. Any other questions?
Tony, you had
There was a question I was just going to ask.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about innovation is you have no clue what's going to happen next. That's all. I mean, that's also the exciting thing, right? Like so much of it happens because somebody's like sitting late at night going, oh man, I hate that. Oh, wait, I could fix that. And then figuring out what the necessary skills are. But there's also some grinding work involved, right? And so I was talking to the strategic registration person for here. She had to go. Talking about, who is being attracted to the college, what needs to be offered to be able to ensure that the right people are coming with the right mindset about what they need to accomplish, and then the college is aligned with offering those things. That's hard work, and the changes in educational curriculum delivery in K-12, that's hard work. There's the work to get government to fund where it needs to be funded. There are several $1 million, quite a few $1 million of money sitting parked by Prairies Canada, which is a federal organization, for development projects in Estevan and area, waiting to be unlocked by people with ideas that match that kind of funding model. It's intended to be spent by the municipality, but the municipality can spend that other places as it sees fit, provided it meets the guidelines of the federal organization. And that's going to be grinding work to, write the grants and proposals and figure out how they align and make sure it works for the community and do the consultations necessary to ensure you're building the right thing and whatever else. I mean, there's a lot of preparation of the landscape necessary to get you to those places. But in the end, it's going to be, a few people coming together with a good idea that I have no idea what it is. Otherwise, I would be the one making the millions. All right. I think that was about it. Yeah, sure.
You see the smaller centers like Estevan, Weyburn, Kindersley, those type of places being the incubators of these technological solutions, but that's all they are, incubators. They feed bigger cities. They feed Genest, Saskatoon, they feed Calgary, Edmonton, Logan.
No, because if that model flew, everybody would be in New York and Mexico City. And it isn't, right? In the end, you live where you want to live. And so if you found a company, there's no reason you can't do it from anywhere you want. I mean, okay, you don't have power, you don't have internet, we're going to have some problems. Kindersley is a good example. Great trucking hub, right? Long haul trucking hub. Huge opportunity. This is a field there where, okay, we're going to see hydrogen long haul. We're going to see autonomous driving or semi-autonomous driving. We're already seeing that in Europe with truck trains, right? The lead is driven by a driver, back 2 trucks or 3 trucks are all just following along autonomously, right? Huge opportunity. Prairie's great place for that. It's not like they're going to hit anything, is it? And those kinds of innovations, there's no reason, like they built a trucking company there already. It didn't magically then move to Calgary because it made more sense. That's just where it is. And so let me look at it from a different way. Saskatoon now has the largest digital industry software research and development center for Siemens in Canada. It's just been named one of 3 global centers of excellence: Cairo, Bangalore, and Saskatoon. They want to build here because our turnover rate is really low. Anywhere else in the world, on average, people stay in the kinds of jobs that we have for 2 years. Here in Saskatoon, we went 7 years without losing anybody. We have a great talent pathway. As much as labor seems to be a bit constrained in Saskatchewan, it's way more constrained in most of the other regions of the world where people are building these kinds of centers. So way, way better to be there. Culturally, it's superior as well. We've built a community that's looking out for each other and is collaborative and is fairly flat. You can go and talk to a director in a corner office as easily. Well, actually, our directors don't have corner offices. They have offices like everyone else. And you can go and talk to them about a problem you've got as easily as talk to anybody else in the organization. These are unique offerings that we can have in Saskatchewan. We don't need to be in Saskatoon. A little bit easier to attract labor to Saskatoon than it is to attract to Estevan, grant you that. And the airport helps. But otherwise, there's no reason it couldn't be anywhere else in the province. This is a huge multinational corporation, 375,000 people, and they're choosing to build in Saskatoon because of those features which they can't find other places. I would argue that there are features in each one of our smaller cities in this province that are similarly extractable to be able to identify as valuable. And I would say in particular, that around things like ag, mining, and energy, where we have local expertise, deep expertise from people who have no desire to move to the city, we've got value that's going to keep those companies here. Some of them are going to move, but lots of them will stay and they'll grow. I don't know, we could debate it. But I will also say that sounds like a you problem, not a me problem, right? You've got to build a city that values and fosters those companies and wants to keep them and where the people are welcome and that people want to move here, right? And so this is part of that, right? I'm excited about it. I'm here, right? I'm going to talk you up. But also, right, like when a company gets to a certain size, the people who are in that company have to feel like they want to stay in Estevan, and that's the intangibles, right? This is why I get in fights with my mayor about, well, we need better bus transportation because the people who are arriving for me and are used to working in Bangalore or in Cairo, well, they don't have cars and they don't have driver's licenses and they want to be able to get around our city and our bus system. And you can take 60 minutes to take a bus trip that would take you 15 minutes to walk. No word of a lie. And so I want better bus transportation for them. That doesn't really seem like that connects to keeping businesses in the city, but it really does, right? If I can't keep people who are used to larger municipalities because I don't seem to have a good culture in the city, or the transportation kind of sucks, or people don't like them, then I'm not going to keep them.